Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the ITAM Kitchen, the place where we have a lot of great discussions, dialogue, that next step. We talk about topics that no one else does, the reality behind what we do in our world. It's so easy to say we're going to get caught up in standards, we're going to throw things out there, we're going to get certifications, etc. But the reality is, until you get your hands dirty, I'll just say it that way, dirty, where you're actually rolling up your sleeves, you know the data, etc., we really don't know how to do our job. That's how this works. There is no training on this. The training is school hard knocks, right? Even though I will say I am writing a book actually on this, but that's a whole different topic, so we can talk about that. There's my commitment, writing a book. Yes, exactly. I find out it's got to be multiple books. It's too much content. So it's a great thing. I can do 30 years of knowledge. You try to get it all contained in a couple pages. It doesn't work. We're very detailed. But anyways, get off of that. For those who don't know me, my name is Bill, Mr. Bill. I'm a recovering IT practitioner, hardware asset management, software asset management, configuration management. And I'm here with the ITAM Kitchen with Rob Collins because we love to talk shop about asset management, software asset management, and configuration management. And that's part of our scenario. But before I dig into that, we're going to have a new topic for today on our accidental CMDB scenario. We're having a lot of fun with this, by the way. Rob, introduce yourself, and then we'll kick this right off.
Yeah. I'm Rob Collins, an industry expert that's more than 30 years, really, going all the way back to the United States, and then coming up to two state agencies, 6 years. And, consultant, ITAM process consultant for like 5 years on that, and then here we are today. And this is a topic that I'm particularly pedantic about. And if you're an ITAM professional, you should be too. So let's proceed.
Very much so. Absolutely. Because the one thing we learned about ITAM on that note is ITAM, it's kind of that hub and spoke, and people disagree. Okay, is it us? Is it CMDB? Is it software asset management? Is all the above? And I say it's all three. Hardware asset, that thing is asset management, software asset management, and configuration management combined. That actually is that hub and spoke for the entire organization. And I say that because without those three areas, the organization can't operate. It just can't in today's world. You need technology. And we are the technology hub as far as understanding that information. Do we have all the other answers? We don't. But being able to say, okay, how can we help you make decisions? Absolutely. That's our role, right? And what we have this entire accidental CMDB, if you haven't been paying attention in the last couple of sessions, I shouldn't say paying attention. If you haven't, get some of the previous ones. There's some great content that Rob and I have been going over on several different sessions, and we're only on session 4. Yeah. Gosh, it's Rob, I have to say on that note, session 4. But I feel like we've been doing this for like 4 weeks, just for the amount of content we talked about. Yeah.
And what we're going to be touching on today, we touched on before, and people have touched on it throughout the industry. And this is critically important. But because those functions are expensive, they try to find their people, companies, that get these products, whatever. They're going to try and kind of find their own way to do it because they're really smart people, and they want to save money. But in this particular case, I would advise utilizing the products that we're about to talk, or not the product specifically, but the workflows that we're going to talk about.
Exactly. Yeah. Because what we're doing is we're a lot of generalities, but what we have happening is we have 2 different environments. We're actually doing 2 different use cases at once. And we're talking through it because they're very similar. One is we have a insurance institution, kind of a mid-sized type insurance company that actually is moving from ServiceNow to Freshworks because of cost justification. The executives made a decision. We're no longer going to use ServiceNow. We're going to go to Freshworks. And we're going to try, and everyone's going to figure out how to make that work inside. It happens. Cost justification, right? And the other was a bank. Bank is actually had Sharewell. They were using Sharewell for their service management, had the CMDB, and being able to say, okay, now we're going to bring a new product because Sharewell is going end of life. If you have Sharewell and you're not paying attention end of life, you need to. It's happening. It gets shut off, I think, in October, if I remember right, of this year. It gets actually literally switch turned off, if I remember right, on the environment. Could be a little off on that, but I think that's correct.
Yeah.
And what they're doing is they're also migrating to Freshworks. So I have two different scenarios happening in parallel on that side. And what has also happened, the additional context to this is the asset managers for both of these scenarios, both these environments, they also own software asset management. They're doing okay. They're not perfect, but they're doing okay. They're doing well. And they've been asked to say, okay, now you're also going to stand up the CMDB. It's not unusual, but that's our scenario. And that's what we've been talking about for a couple of days now. Like I said, we're in session 4. I can't believe we're only in session 4. Again, it feels like we've been doing 4 weeks. A lot of good content here. And today is about discovery. We're going to turn on the discovery and say, okay, now we're going to comparison analysis, right? Comparison, how we look at data, et cetera. And we're going to talk through that so we can see what that outcome needs to be to say, what do we have? What do we not have? That next step. And what do we need to start working through? And that's the whole idea, how we're working through that. So, Rob, let me ask a quick question. When we start deploying discovery, everyone says, flip on the switch because that's what the vendor promised, and it's going to show me everything. What's your response?
Well, the response, of course, is that it's going to discover the stuff that's on. It's going to if it's an agent, right? It's going to discover the stuff you put the agent on, and it's communicating back to home. It's going to call home, or it's going to be prompted. So technically, that's how those things work. Is it going to grab the stuff that's not, let's say, in operation? No, if it's not turned on, if it's not connected, if it's just stock room, it won't. So keep in mind that this is something that you're going to get, and often is replacing the logging and cataloging of purchases in an asset management database. Remember, that's owned by somebody else. Here, you can act on it because it's been installed. Why? Because you could do that, right? Flip on the discovery, right? And work very closely with your vendor on this, because this is one of those key implementation areas that can go south or that comes out unfavorable. And you've already spent a bunch of money on the product and you're doing all this work. Don't ensure that you come out of it with quality results. And if you do find gaps, you're working with the vendor to identify why those gaps occurred and putting fixes in place immediately to address that.
No, that's an excellent point. And I guess the additional point is patience as you work through this, right?
Mm-hmm.
It takes a little bit of time to also be able to say, you know what, we need to work through it. And we need to figure out how to further refine how we're discovering and how we're pulling data in place to say, okay, who else needs to be involved? And this is part of that team collaboration we talk about all the time, is being able to say, okay, Russ, it doesn't matter whether it's network, data center, desktops, et cetera, right? All of a sudden you have these new discovery tools and new discovery functionality being put in place, and you need everyone else's involvement. Maybe there's packaging involved. Maybe as far as how you're distributing it, right? Maybe there's different dynamics you have to have for different environments and different setups and how you have to get into that environment. I mean, for example, I know with the insurance companies, and I think it's a healthcare insurance company, if I remember right, they have restricted networks. And trying to get information out is not easy. So how are you going to work with that type of scenario as well, right? It's not unusual, right? That's what comes to mind for me, Rob, on this type of scenario, because there's one thing to say, okay, start collecting and start comparing, which is actually where we want to be. But there's another thing to say, okay, what are we about to walk into? What's the environment? We can't just flip on the switch and say, discover everything as the vendor promised.
Often, however, I mean, before you even think about throwing any of those switches, you better have the right people in the room. Who are you going to need? All right. You want your systems engineering people in there. You want your networking people in there, because they're the ones that are going to be touching all of those devices, no matter how you do it. Run a PowerShell script, do something like that, and you could grab everything, all of it, everything that you possibly could ever want to pull for comparisons. And you'll want to do that later when it comes to auditing the activity. Get your InfoSec people in there, because they too should have topological mapping for all of the connected systems. And for those that are supposed to be air gapped, if you will, if it's in a special sector like defense, or other things of that nature, right? And of course, you want to make sure that the major stakeholders, right, they don't all have to be in those particular sessions, but they need to be informed on whatever timely basis you're giving for the overall project management, whether it's a weekly check-in, a bi-weekly check-in, or 3 times a week check-in. Make sure that that information is going to them about that discovery. And then finally, you're going to want some people in the room that are just really good that figure stuff out, because there are going to be unknowns. They're going to happen. And you definitely want to work with the vendor, your partner, when you're going through those things. And you want to remediate them as quickly as you can, okay? Because the target here is accuracy. It's the greatest amount of accuracy that you can have surveying your entire unit, your entire business, for all of those IT assets.
Well, correct. It's that. There's no such thing as not enough communication. This is where you need to over communicate as well, right?
Yeah.
Over communication is extremely key in topics like these, because you're changing the environment, you're changing what you're putting in the environment, you're changing how you're discovering the environment. You're going to have different attributes come out as well, right? And being able to say, what am I walking into? Maybe there's a first time you'd be able to say, okay, let's maybe you want to put a test environment in as well, right? Usually IT is notorious for being the test ground. It's just the way it works.
Don't ever test in prod, please.
Yeah. And from a prod perspective, you're working in development instance because you're bringing up something new, right? So you have that part, but in your production environment, where Rob's going is, you need to be careful of the production environment in general, because you do not want to down the business.
Oh, you absolutely can. I mean, that's why all of this activity would be happening, right, in a dev or a test environment. Just if you remember those three words, dev, test, prod. Everybody that works in IT, everybody definitely that works within system programming, they should know those terms. Anybody operating within the data silo of your business, right? Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and also keep in mind at this point, when we start pulling, what are we really trying to look for? Because you need to set that criterion, right? We've talked about test environment, et cetera, but it's also because at this point, we've already discovered what's in the previous sessions. We've talked about, okay, what's in the CMDB already? What do we need to move across? What's kind of the baseline we need to start from? And now it's being able to say, okay, here's what we believe we have, or what we know we have. Let's validate it. Make sure, okay, this is true. You might find some gaps. That's great. But that's where the comparison comes into play. Let's look at that and say, and this is where also your governance, your governing board for, I'll just say ITAM. I won't say just IT, but for the program. Your stakeholders are going to help you with this, because they know what they want to look for. They would know what they need, and say, okay, this is also where you can delegate, where it's just not only on your plate. That's extremely important, because how often, Rob, have you, I know I'm guilty of this, gone out and you start an activity and it's like, no, I'm going to just go ahead and do it myself. It's easier.
Yeah.
Right? The reality is we need to delegate that, right?
Yeah. For projects like this, for instance, that are fairly, I won't say that they last super long necessarily, but I will say that they're detailed and they're heavily connected within your business systems. You always want to have a few key players there. That's why I mentioned last time, get a project manager assigned to the overall effort, so they make sure that things are going forward. If you hit anything, that causes you delays, et cetera, that you're using a RAG scale or the red, amber, green to show your project momentum. And then, of course, make sure that you've got 2 or 3 people. Like, you consider this, for instance, from the disaster management standpoint. You have what's considered to be the general staff, right? I mean, there will be one person that's appointed as the leader of the project, no matter what, right? And that's going to be you as the ITAM person who's going to give in charge of putting the systems in, getting the discovery on, and 100% accurate. And yes, you are shooting for that 100% accurate, right? Have those people check in with you on a periodic basis as well to make sure that you're fit for the purpose of this function. Oh, hey, Kim's out there. Great to see you. And then whatchamacallit, and then do those check-ins back and forth. Is everybody okay? Does anybody need downtime? Is anybody feeling sick? Those kinds of things. So this way you move forward and you keep your eye on the vision. You keep your mind on that goal, that long-term goal that you're going to get to. You got to go through these steps. If you need, right, and if you're not an expert in the technical aspects, have an interpreter of sorts to be there to speak technicalese, if you will. If you don't understand the full world of finance, have somebody there that can be there to interpret what you're doing and what information they would need to know, that they'd want to know, and etc. Personnel with HR, for instance, or
Mhm.
Your procurement, especially in your contract management folks, anybody on that side that deals with SAM and the legalese, for instance, the intellectual property. If you have those folks at the table and with you, then you know you're going to cover all the bases. And if you have leadership support, by all means, that's the most important thing, so that you can ensure some degree of success on this project.
Well, absolutely. And it's also some additional stakeholders I would bring to mind. It depends upon the size of the environment. We have mid to small environments here, but if you have a larger environment, you might have SMEs, right? You might have
Yes.
specialty areas, right? And different, whether it's the network, whether it's the infrastructure, whether you talk about standards,
Yep.
there's lots of different aspects. It could be even different parts of your service management team that's involved, right?
You have to be.
I mean, yeah, it could be change management, it could be problem management. It just depends on who's
Yep.
involved. If some of them want to be aware, it's like, you know what, I'm just going to tag in the meeting. I just need to be aware. But it's like, oh, really? Do I need them? To me, I say bring it on. I don't
Yeah.
know how you are, Rob, but I say bring it on, because the more people are aware and they can get aware,
Yeah.
and they have their insight. Now, you always have the individuals that kind of it's like try to drag things out. It's not that. It's just more about awareness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and say, okay, I want you to at least be aware of what's going on, because for them, their world's changing too.
Yeah.
Absolutely, right?
And you got to really, this is part of that whole planning function at the very top before you really start. You really have to know who needs to know, who's going to
Mm-hmm.
be, who's a customer. Let me just put it that way. Who is going to be a recipient that utilizes the data that's going to be generated by what you're doing, right?
Yep.
And change management is one of those major stakeholders. For every change, it must be associated with CIs, or configuration items. So when this inventory comes through, and it should be done in such a way that it's near real time, there's ways to do it, but that's the paid consultancy. But I'm telling you, there are ways to do it. For instance, and that information then feeds to those guys that are doing change. It feeds to incident, because you've got to know, hey, why am I being called out on a trouble? What's the device? What's the software, etc.? What are the CIs? Well, that feeds into that, and so those folks need to be notified. They need to be at the table. So that's all of your desktop support, for instance. Your networking topology people, they should be in the know, because they should know the ownership of many of the CIs, and they know the roles that those things fit. So all of these are key stakeholders that you either have to consult or inform on data that's going to come from your system when the discovery is turned on and as close to 100% accurate as possible.
Well, exactly. And it's also important to say, ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not about just leading the effort. We're a broken record on this. I ask for help when you need help, because there's no way you're going to be able to control all of this, right?
Yeah.
And if you have the stakeholders and use it as a team and delegate, that makes this whole effort much easier.
Yeah. Just be
Right?
upfront. When it's time to actually get engaged on this, just be upfront and say, look, I'm not a lawyer. I don't have any expertise in law. I know a little about IP. I know a little bit about how you say data retention, for instance. Okay, like what you have to have based on the business that you're supporting. Many times this conversation has been had, right? So you get that expertise. Just let them know. It's like, if and if you're confronted ever, like in a project like this, and they say, well, this is why we hired you, then you let them know. Say, no, you hired effectively a ringleader who knows enough about what's going on not to be bamboozled. That's what you hired. Now, give me the support that I'm asking for, and then make sure that you cover their bases around all of those silos that you need expertise around, that you're not an expert in. Nobody's an expert in everything. So definitely be forward about that. That should lead it.
Well, but these are things that we're when Rob and I are talking about this,
Mhm.
we didn't learn this in the classroom.
Nope.
This is the school of hard knocks, right? And be able to say, okay, a little bit of project management tied into there. We had to learn how to do that. And so you have some of the awareness, maybe a project manager or program manager involved. But you also have, and let me break it down like this. Because of the two different environments, we have two completely different scenarios going to the same product, right? For
Yes.
example, the insurance company is using ServiceNow. My understanding is, from what I understand with them, is they actually had a fully operational ServiceNow instance in place which means they were doing incident change problem as an example, right? So
Okay.
they were already using those tools. So you have a very functional type of organization that's doing that transition. So for them to be aware, everything what Rob was just talking about, the stakeholders, they need to be acutely,
Yeah.
I know that's a big word, acutely aware of the transition because it totally impacts them. They know what they had. They have no idea what to expect. They might have seen a demo, great, but they know the world's changing too. They have their own processes and activities and worksheets and things that like that are happening.
Mhm.
They need a transition. Whereas the other side with the banking environment, I'll say it's not quite as mature on that side. They were not doing quite as much with the CMDB and how they were leveraging it as well as on their service desk. And so from that, the different level of maturity for them, they need to be acutely aware because their world is changing as well. They have more workload they think is coming their direction, and they're unaware of what's forthcoming to help benefit them even more.
Yeah.
Again, similar scenarios, two completely different outcomes.
Mm.
And that's important. We were just talking about turn on discovery.
They're similar, right? They
Yeah.
are similar.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I was going to say about that was a lot of this decision making should have gone in before this project was launched. For instance, tool selection, it's difficult to do because really to do it properly, you have to know your business, know all the functions that you're using within the tool that you're supporting your business. If there are any associated with like documented workflows or programmatic stuff, you have to know what that stuff is. And then when you're looking over other tools, you sit down with the vendor, you watch the demo, maybe you eat a lunch or something like that. And they're supposed to be telling you that for all of your financial intake transactions, we have this module over here and we'll train your people how to use it. You can go from here to here, right? And the same thing all the way down, every single workflow for every process that you've all documented, like impeccably, because that's what everybody does, right? Or you figure that out, you go back and document, and then you do a tool alignment, right? So assuming, for instance, that you chose it just on the basis of cost or from the basis of the technical load of the product, right, and control, you then want to look very closely at making sure that you survey what you're doing, how you're doing it, so that you can translate that to the next tool. That has to be done.
And also keep in mind, not all the features and functionality are going to be identical between the tools.
Right.
And that's a major, I'll call it a gap, but it's a more of an awareness in this case, right? Decisions were made while they're moving between the tools, and sometimes advancement, sometimes not, right?
Yeah.
And you have to realize back to, I'm going to use the word simplification, right? It's going to be more of a simplified type of environment versus the complex type of environment. I mean, with ServiceNow, you can get quite complex, crazily complex. I mean, I've known, I know environments that are completely doing re-platforms. That means could do a complete re-implementation of ServiceNow instance right now, and they've had it for 10 years because they can't do the upgrades, right? So they're redoing it, but the complexity is still there because they have a complex environment. Now that's a perfect environment for like ServiceNow, right? So, and again, I'm not trying to promote any product, and there's nobody sponsoring any of these on that side. This is just us talking openly, right? But you also have, I'll just call it the simplification, which is really what the Freshworks environment really is. It's really about simplifying internal discovery, what you pull back. The good thing is they do have products like Device 42. I think that's the right product. Yeah, that's the right product. I've got so many products. Yeah. Yeah, they acquired them. And I don't know if anybody knows what Device 42 has done historically. Is actually Device 42, their claim to fame, how they came to be, is they actually help data center migrations historically. So when you had a complete data center move from one location new to the next, and you had just different locations, et cetera, this was the tool you brought up to understand the entire infrastructure. So you knew exactly what was there initially in the current data center, tracked it throughout, and then you knew when you moved it to the new data center to make sure all the applications were online, et cetera, you put it in over there, you do a comparison between the two. So that's historically how Device 42 has been used. Now, exactly how Freshworks using it, it's probably a little bit just more of discovery. It's probably not as intense as my guess. But it doesn't mean you can't use it independently. But it's just now they incorporate it because they acquired the product. They're incorporating. Say, okay, now this is our discovery engine. So as you think about flipping it on, we have lots of different scenarios. Oh my gosh, we're already 30 minutes into this, Rob. This is awesome.
Mhm.
It doesn't take long. Rob and I found out to have a great chat is being able to say, okay, what's the different environments, different scenarios, what do the stakeholders need, what do they want, and help further align that. Again, it goes back to the requirements, but you're also further refining that. And you're going to have surprises along the way too. Because if you think you're going to do this and have no surprises as you're doing discovery, as you're bringing this on, I don't know what utopian world you came from. I have not seen that in any of my projects. Rob, have you?
I haven't, but just glancing over and looking at the Fresh Service Discovery Agent article, it's really easy, like to push it out based on what I'm reading here. So
That's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward.
this would be
It is.
something that I would definitely like get my engineering team in on and say, hey, you guys look this over, have a look. Let's get with InfoSec. It is an agent, so because the first thing that happens as soon as you say agent is information security is like, nah, network traffic and too much noise. And you can filter that stuff out, and this actually it's worth it. So for something like that, yeah.
Let's go down that rabbit hole for a minute, for a few minutes. I think that's good for the users because there's also regulations coming out about discovery tools. Believe it or not, Europe just passed them to say, okay, you have to unify how you're discovering information on systems because everyone has a different discovery agent. Don't know all the details behind it, but be aware of that. And I say that not to hinder the current deployment, but realize the discovery tools, how they're used today, will be changing. Right? You're still going to collect, but there's going to be more unification than what there has been previously due to regulatory needs and compliance and honestly network bandwidth because it's killing the network. It's killing the internet because people are remote and you've got like 5 different agents on these systems. And trust me, I came in an environment like that, right? Let's track everything. Yeah. But I say that from an awareness perspective because that's something else you want to be aware of. It's like, okay, we're doing this now. This may change in 6 to 12 months. We may have to employ a new agent. Now, at that point, you're on Freshworks. Let's put at that point, you're going to be on Freshworks, and it's up to Freshworks to help communicate how it's going to change and transition. Maybe we'll have a later session on that at that point in time. I don't know. Personally, I'd love to see a little bit. I'm a techie guy myself. I'd like to see a little bit of comparison about before and after when they do that. But maybe that's a discussion. That's a discussion for a different day. But back to our discovery, right? Is we've talked about the environments. We've talked about some of the restrictions. We've talked and discussed and brought up that we have different stakeholder needs, requirements, how to do it, the process. It's also being able to say, and we've also talked about over communication. And with that over communication, we have to say, okay, that means regular status updates. This is not in this case, it's not about a monthly status update, right? It might require it daily. It just depends upon how you're working. Maybe weekly. Weekly is probably the preferred method. Daily, if something's going really crazy, especially if you have critical needs, and you're going to have it. I mean, we're talking about banking. We're talking about insurance, right? And medical. People are counting on funds both ways, right? Reimbursements, and I'm talking about it could be hospitals, it could be patients on the as far as the insurance company, and on the banking. Everybody likes to get money one way or another, whether it's loans, deposits, etc. And make sure it's like, okay, you deposit something, you do it in the app, you don't want to see a delay. You want to do this as quick as possible, right? So some of that performance. Well, those are some of the things rattling through my head. What else comes to mind for this when we flip on the switch? Because we need to micromanage how this works to me. But that's my baseline inventory of part of my brain coming out. Rob, what else comes to mind on this?
Well, you utilize the things that you do have right now that are working. If you have an active change management system, this should all be documented in it, really. I mean, you'll want to do this stuff. If you're strictly in that I only do change management for production systems thing, then so be it. But definitely utilize that so that as you're putting this thing in and you have a full implementation plan you've worked out with the vendor, who, of course, should have been on this and have done this hundreds of times, you want to make sure that you have all that stuff present And you have, it's like having a war room stood up for any given incident or scenario. In this case, you're going to launch this product. You should have done all of your testing ahead of time. You should have passed all of the necessary tests, and then we're ready to go to production, right? Then, all right, that's when you have a command center, if you will, a war room. Have each of the stakeholders necessary operating and ready to go, watching systems, looking at inventory, looking at network traffic, looking at security, etc. And do this the right way, and then pull that off. Have your expectations laid out and written ahead of time so that you can follow those. That's what change management's all about. And or have your failover or your fallback plans ready to go in an instance. So this way, you're having the least amount of impact to the business, which is one of the criteria for both of these scenarios that we introduced.
You're right. There will be duplicity at this point, right?
Well, some, but you don't necessarily not want that.
Well, and you're going to have some duplicity because it's that transition time for discovery.
You need it for auditing.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
Doing the auditing, and you're also going to have it because you're in this case. Okay, we'll ServiceNow. ServiceNow is going to still be online until Freshworks is brought up online, and all we're trying to do is say what's doing from the device standpoint. We're not saying the rest of the system or environment's online yet. We're just not. But from a data attribute, how we're looking at it, how you're tracking it, is very much going to be, for the discovery side, it very much is going to be in parallel between the two environments, which means you now have two agents hitting or scanning, or depending upon how it's being deployed, right? Whether it's agent or agentless, doesn't matter. So you have that duplicity in place. It also means additional hats everyone needs to wear, because typically you don't get dedicated individuals for projects like these. It's like, well, okay, we're going to transition it, right? A little bit of both, right? You have some department individuals kind of leading the effort. Maybe you have a project manager that's overseeing, and they're doing it great. But you also have the multiple hats activities as well. So you need to figure out what you're doing for the workload of the individuals. Again, I'm going back to the individuals, do a checkpoint with them to say, okay, how are we doing? Are we able to do this? Are we not? Where are we in the timeline? Also, from something else comes to mind is identify at this point, you should have also established when you want the other agents to be deinstalled.
It's part of your cutover plan. Yep, that's it. That's part of your cutover. When you have that.
And that typically will happen even before you go into production for discovery.
Yep. Well, yeah, this is all part of that action of moving into implementation into prod, if you will, right? So the active working environment. So those sorts of things are just common practice within the industry when you're doing that. I say that, of course, assuming that everybody in the industry knows this, right? But the fact of the matter is, many don't. Many get by with their ITAM programs, just sort of minimum funding, and just kind of do what we feel is necessary to avoid an audit. This is a bit more than that. Considering what this is going to eventually feed into, all those different areas, I think it comes with a great deal of importance. It should be handled properly. It should be documented. It should be tested along the way. The proper transition planning, cutover, all of those things are elements of that.
Absolutely. And realize that at the same time, when you do all that, it's that collaborative approach that's going to help it all come together. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a transition. It's that check and balance. And back to those unexpected moments, right? Sky is the limit on where I want to go with that one. I'll be good. We've seen plenty. We've had plenty of scar tissue out of moments like these, because everyone says, "Oh, we're just going to flip it, and there it is, make the magic happen." It's kind of the furthest from the truth.
Yeah, no, it shouldn't necessarily be treated like that. For instance, I don't know anybody yet that's implemented, especially the bigger of the ITSM tools. Nobody's ever done it one shot, not without having to call in help and outside contractors and experts to help them along to how would you say, to remediate their implementation. And I've seen it, and I have heard and seen it with customers that have done this a couple of times, like 2-3 times over the course of, let's say, like 5 years. Restricted only by the amount of money that they've got available to do it, the budget.
Yep. And realize it will be okay. What's all said and done, everything's going to work out. But There's no but. It's been, however, it's being to say, it's be consistently showing up and realize that, sometimes it is okay to take a breather. It's like, okay, this is crazy. Our discussions are getting a little intense. We need to let's do it. Let's go walk the dog, come back, and we'll continue on the dialogue, right? And I say that from, again, we're trying to flip on the switch for discovery. That's all we're trying to do, right? And we talked. Gosh, we're 30 to 45 minutes in the discussion now. We're barely flipping on the switch just to do discovery right now, right? So Rob, let's talk into a little bit on discovery. Want to start looking at some of the comparison. What comes to mind when we start comparing data? Because that's really where we want to get. We want to validate and say, okay, what's out there? What's the important things we need to be concerned about? What's not? That's what comes to mind for me.
Let's talk about this from a couple of perspectives: the planning perspective, right, and the execution perspective, right, and then the audit perspective at the end. Really briefly, as much as we can do. In the planning phase, for instance, you're going to get your DBAs involved. You want to know what work functions. You remember what are you doing for the business using this old ITSM tool, right? And kind of mapping out that function. And what are you going to do in the new tool? The expected workflows there on the new one, right? Or if you recall that exercise, right, then you should think that to support those workflow functions, we've got to have data within the following named columns. If you created a column in the old product, which you shouldn't do, preferably, you use what's there. And you know what's there, you use what's there. And if you don't catalog any of those weird changes or whatever, then you're kind of caught holding the bag at update time, or if you're doing a system transition like this. But you get those fields, right? And you get all of the criteria around the data. And you make sure that this is in alignment, and you have a transition plan for that, a migration plan, if you will. Or if you're going to do the flip on the discovery and let's see, then you're going to hold this stuff over here and prepare for examination. And the new system, the expected fields and all of the tables, et cetera, and how they support, how the product supports the business function. Just keep that relationship in mind, right? That's what you need to be able to come back. When you planned out the migration for all of those, then you move to execution and you watch as the data goes in. And you should already have people there kind of looking at the contents of the data, doing short, small audits on, is it proper set of fields? Do we have the correct amount of data? How much data came over from this point to this point, right? And ensure that all that stuff at a technical level is covered, right? And then at the end, you can then look to the workflow experts, the people that have been using this, and say, can you get to X report back 2 months ago on the old system using the data moved into the new, or the data discovered in the new? Those kinds of very deeply technical tests, very detailed tests, are what are going to give you that confidence at the end that the migration was successful, we got everything that we need, and there's zero to low impact to the business.
And there's something else. Let's bring it back out a little bit, right? Too. If you need help from an outside perspective, also be part of a community. Be part of a community of that, and it's like we have the IT Management Co-op. It's one of the founders of that. Yeah, and collaborate there too, and say, okay, I need to do this, which is actually how this whole topic started, because I actually have active customers or members that are actually asking these questions. So that's literally how we got started on this, is how do we put that in place, right? And being able to be around peers, it's like, okay, I need to figure out how to ask for help as I get through this. That's a great place to also go. So I just want to put that little nugget out there too, because that's also important to say, okay, how do we look at how do we keep our own self-aware, as well as we figure out how we can help each other externally with peers, not just peers inside the business, but peers externally, to say, okay, are we going down the right path? Or are we going down our own organizational tangent again, which is easy to do. Right?
Yeah, it's very easy to reach out. you should be able to reach out to any member of the community that you're affiliated with, the peer on the outside, and say, hey, man, we're making this migration thing happen. And we've run into some snags. But what can you tell me about the last time that you did a similar migration? Did you run into the same kinds of snags? Did you have problems with the vendor? How did you fix this stuff? We should be leaning on each other for this information, because there aren't a whole lot of industry sources out there, unfortunately. You get product specific, each of the vendors has their stuff, but the experience is what we're talking about, what Bill's alluding to here. And that's part of the greater conversation that's being had.
Well, exactly, because when you look at the bigger picture, right, you have to figure, okay, this goes to the planning or anything along the way. You need to have that additional community and outside perspective always, right? How many companies have I ever started for? That's like, okay, you're good. You always have these ideas when you start the job, you start doing things, you start getting this task. But once you're between 6 and 8 weeks into the role, you've been integrated. Your mind's not the same way. You're now seeing things as the business. Maybe it's 12 weeks, right? And how you put that forward. Oh, by the way, anybody's online, I've seen a couple of you out there. That's great. Hello, how are you? Doing great here. Appreciate some of the feedback. Ask your questions. You guys probably have questions too. And again, we're talking about the accidental CMDB scenario. Maybe you have a different flair on the discovery part. Put your comments in there. Absolutely. It's not just about hearing us talk. It's about being able to say, how are we putting this? How are we helping everybody, right? And from there, you say, okay, how do we, again, comparison of data. To me, this is a great opportunity for AI. The comparison. So there's one thing to put spreadsheet to spreadsheet, but when you have the spreadsheets, the artificial intelligence, we see it, whether it's Copilot, Gemini, pick your flavor, right? Maybe it's something inside the tool. And maybe the tool can't do it. It's just everyone has different limitations, how they're leveraging AI and how much they do within it. Happens all the time, right? Trust me, I see plenty of them, work with lots of them myself, is leverage your attributes. When you understand what the core attributes are, have it also give a comparison to see what the trends are with AI, because that's going to save you tremendous amount of work.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many hours I've spent on trying to compare data like that with Access databases and spreadsheets and do the comparison, and here's the result and sub-tabbing, all that. I mean, it takes between a couple hours and a couple days to do some of that sometimes. And if you can leverage AI to do that for you, well, that just makes it so much easier. What's your thoughts on things like that, Rob?
There are ways that there are. When you're talking about a full inventory of a fairly large organization, you could be looking at 2 million rows, 5 million rows. Not with a human being. The number of opportunities for error in that process are fairly high, especially if extrapolated out to the number of rows. So, this is an excellent place for AI. And if you're using spreadsheets, right, to always start from where you are, and you can utilize these tools to help along the way, right? The Copilot function is something I've got experience working with in that. I'm quite happy with the results. I am also aware of its proneness to error, which is a little bit better than the average stuff out there, 85-15. So I can say positive things about it, but be an expert in what it is that you're doing, because if you see the hallucination begin, you definitely want to bring a halt to that and reset that operation. It can be very helpful.
Oh yeah, yeah. And it's and on that, it's just being able to say, okay, a comparison. It's that's also for me from a governance perspective. Again, we're sharing the wealth, and if you can help also your stakeholders say, okay, here's where some of the results are, they're going to say that doesn't look quite right. Or something's a little off. Well, you want to know about that. I'll just call it the offness. Interesting choice of words. I just made up a new word, offness. Use the offness to say, how can we further refine how we're doing this?
To increase that,
right?
Because
maybe there's a product issue just came out. Yeah.
Make it cleaner.
Yeah, because actually there's a great point. Cleanliness, accuracy, how are you defining it? It's also that opportunity too to say, okay, we want clean data to come in. We're starting to pull discovery, starting to do comparison. What does clean really mean? Ooh, I made a rhyme. There you go. It was a Wednesday on Hump Day on the upward swing of it.
I can tell you. I
Go
can tell
for it.
you what clean means, right? Clean means that all of those functions that you're going to use are able to properly interpret that data. Clean
Mhm.
also means, for instance, a degree of completeness, let's say, to the data, because any gaps are clearly, they need to be made up for. That should show in an audit. That should show in simple functions too. I mean, the simplest function that I can think of that you can do, let's say, is use a PowerShell script and go run all of your online devices and bring back baseboard. If you bring back baseboard and you're doing all of your work through serial numbers, there you go. It's live. It's real time. It's right now. You get that actual report the moment that you send the request. You can
Yeah.
audit against that. I mean, and that's something that's like it's current. It's going to be correct, unless you're getting, data that's like corrupted along the response. It's fairly straightforward. And if you ever open up any of those agents, you find that's what they're doing. They're doing it with VBS script, or they're doing it with C# or C++, or whatever. They're using Python now to do those kinds of things in interface. So there's ways to work around it. There's ways to do it like this to use to audit your results. That's the proper use. And all of this is going to get you a much better feeling at the end of the day. Even if, let's say, the result was, all right, we got about maybe 70% of all of our items, but the accuracy is really high at 98 or 99% on all the ones we did get. So now we just got to look at that gap. And then you can go back to the table and work out a technical solution for that.
Mhm. No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Again, how you further refine it, how you're discovering, how you look at the environment, what you're able to capture and bring through.
Oh, yeah.
Because those attributes are also going to be important. I don't know how. Well, Rob, you've done government, so you kind of understand this one, right?
Yeah.
You have the entire environment. We'll just say there's corporate environment, then there's a restricted environment. Well, the
Oh, okay.
restricted
Yes.
environment, you can only get limited, maybe 12 attributes across. That's all they're going to let you through.
If they let you
that,
do
right?
any, right?
Yeah.
But you can sit down with those teams though, and you can negotiate what you can get, right? Let's say, for instance, it's an air gapped environment, and you don't have a clearance, right? And none of your people has a clearance. Well, all right, you reach across to the other side and say, I need to be able to get an inventory. Tell me what's classified, or rather, tell me what is not classified that I am able to access, or I can give a tool to you, and you can take it in there and you can get it. We will catalog the space as air gapped environment XYZ, whatever number, right? So you at least have that on file. And then the inventory comes across from there. If they don't let you have access to any of that, then you have to accept the idea and relay by communication to the leadership that these areas exist, significant investment was probably made in those areas, and it's completely out of sight from your team's perspective. They would have to go to finance in order to get the data on that.
Absolutely.
Sometimes you don't have a choice, but if you do, negotiate that and let them come back to you and bring you inventories. Maybe they'll agree to do it once every 6 months. All right, it's not real time, but it's like, man, it's the best view you got.
Well, that's also where you further refine the frequency. Again, if we're talking about data accuracy, we're talking about frequency. You're further refining that as you start discovering, because this is where, let's say, the rubber meets the road.
Mm-hmm.
You start to get data. You're starting to compare to say, okay, what do I see? What do I not see? Because, for example, if I know that I'm able to collect data and say, well, just leverage the ServiceNow environment, right? So typically a little bit more robust. You put it out there. You have discovery tools on multiple different flavors, right?
Yes.
You say, okay, well, I discovered all this equipment. You start putting Freshworks. It says maybe 1/3 of the equipment. It's like, I hear you. I'm not happy. Executives need to be aware of this. This is also where you get your product vendor is also going to, your product solution vendor is also going to have to be in that conversation from a support standpoint. And everyone needs to be on the same page as you're moving forward in this. It's not about, okay, you flip on the switch and accept what it is. You have to say, okay, where do we sit on this, right? We had some expectations and there were some assumptions, and we know what happens with assumptions being made that we need clarity on. I know some people hate the word clarity, but this is extremely important for clarity. And have that dialogue to say, okay, we're doing discovery. That's great. I've got support on the speed dial to support because I know if something goes down, we need to call the Freshworks support team for the discovery and say, okay, let's understand how it happens and what's going on and what their gap is.
You can actually call them, and in some cases, if the investment's big enough, they'll have somebody on site. No, I'm pretty sure they'll do that.
Well,
I've been in those situations before, and most of the time, there was a rep on site.
Oh yeah. Usually reps on site, or at least within reach, phone call or whatever it is. You have phone numbers, you can reach them, possibly support personnel. And it's also when you go through the reviews, also include them. Now you need your internal reviews. You need to go ahead and do that, but also have regular status updates with them to say, here's how we're progressing, because they want to know as much as you do. And it's not about knowing about all the secret sauce inside your organization. It's not that at all. They just want to make sure it's being deployed properly and it's getting used the way you need it to. Because everyone's going, you went out of the box, but at the same time, let's have that communication flow. And sometimes people say, we'll deal with the vendor later and just ignore them. You realize, I don't know if you realize, most organizations don't realize this. Do you realize the vendor's actually on pins and needles when you don't reach out to them? Because they're not sure what the result is. They're not sure if you like them, you dislike them. They have the last communication, great. But it's been a week or two since you last talked to them. Yeah, they're busy, but they would love to hear that you're progressing. It helps. It provides that little additional comfort as you do this. So communication, I would also go out there and put that in place too. And you have to figure out who's whom, whether you're leading that discussion, whether you have someone else do. That's a departmental or internal discussion for you guys as far as the organization who's going to do that contact and reach out to the vendor. But that's also important to say, okay, let's just at least keep them in the loop, because when they know something goes wrong, you're going to tell them that. That's typical when you hear thing. I'm an old support guy myself. Mm-hmm. Never heard of anything. If it's going right, you'll never hear it. If it goes wrong, you're the first one to hear it.
This is often true. Yeah. Staying below the radar, silence. I don't know. I would love to speak to somebody that knows like publisher audit rates, right, and publisher audit triggers. We want to know to them, what's the evidence? What are the supporting numbers, if you have them around, the number of folks and the types of audits versus the either lack of communication or over communication. I know I was involved in one on the client side. That was the reduction from $500,000 down to $30K. But I can imagine that there should be some numbers around it. Is it better to stay silent, or is it better to maintain a low level but steady communication, renewals, things like that? Some growth is expected. I know that there are triggers to some publishers around that. Not enough growth is a trigger. A sudden change in the number of installations reported, that can be a trigger. That kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're coming to the top of the hour. And really, for what would you say to help wrap up that part of the discussion? This part of the discussion, Rob. How would you state it? And then as we wrap this up in the last 3 minutes.
Well, I think that up till this point, if you haven't implemented discovery, right, and really work with these teams to get it in place and make it as near real time as possible, and it is possible, that you're really losing out. You can't manage what you don't know, what you can't count, what you can't see. So this is a critical step towards that, and really understanding the value that ITAM brings, like to your business, just in the form of risk reduction, mitigation, and protection. And that information system, ITAM link between the two, that's critical. That's really important. I'm actually going to be speaking at one of the local universities about that to a class here within a week. So I'm excited about that as well. And then what this conversation brings to our entire community, Bill.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
because it is important, because this is the foundation. And some people say, okay, well, discovery is only for the CMDB, right? Or versus asset management. And it's like, you have to have a relatability on both sides, right?
Like, we should do a session on who are the customers of a properly managed CMDB with all 4 of the C's in consideration.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Let's do that. And I think in summary for what we're talking about at the moment is to also realize the discovery engine, and we've just talked about this for exhaustively for the last hour, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of people involved. It continues to help refine scope. Sometimes it's defining some of the scope. It's also defining what you're going to be, what you define as accuracy, what data attributes you need to pull across, the environments, how you're going to be working with those, which also means helps refine what the process is going to be like. And I say process from a swim lane perspective in this case,
Yep.
right? As far as how data is going to get to you or to the system. It's also going to say, okay, how are we going to store it within Freshworks itself? What can it store or not store? And that's important too, because Freshworks, it's okay. It's great. It has some foundation, but there might be some attributes it's not capturing that you need, and it's not going to for another product release. Okay, well,
There's a way to do that.
let's also back with your spreadsheet. Sometimes you have to bring the spreadsheet back. I hate to put it like that, but sometimes that's what happens, right? Spreadsheet or a different database, et cetera, to complement it. That's just how that happens. And that's not negative. It's just more about how you look at the level of maturity, how you're refining it, what you need, and those parts in the business.
Training meals are okay.
Absolutely. Lots of learning opportunities, what I call it. But with that, we're going to call today a wrap. Appreciate everyone. We're going to continue on Friday on the ITAM Kitchen for session number 5. Hey, feel free to look at it if you want to see exactly what's our schedule. Have everything on YouTube. I do it 1 week at a time on LinkedIn. We'll just say it's easier that way, and I'll leave it at that. But we'll be back on 10 a.m. on Friday. We'll look forward to seeing everyone then. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Bye, all.